Morning, everybody. It's Leon here from the British Chamber, along with my Vice President Cecilia Albertain and EMA and Mission Control. Really excited about this morning's webinar and indeed the panel that we've convened. Paul Bondi from Rothschild and the Solidarity Fund, and Adrian Enthoven from the Solidarity Fund and Executive Chairman of Yellowwoods. And so thank you guys for joining us, and I'll introduce you properly and hand over to you shortly after I've set the context. I think we're into some week 8, week 9 of lockdown now. And I think the early webinars we did, we're all fairly optimistic and supportive about the direction the government was taking, the statesman-like leadership from Cyril, the assertive leadership that we were going to really grasp this nettle that is COVID. And over 3 weeks, we prepare ourselves and brace ourselves for the virus and indeed for the economic repercussions. But as time has gone on and the lockdown has been extended, and the science has been conflicting and some of the decisions have been unreasonable, there's been increased frustration in the business community. And that's why we've reached out to our fellow chambers across South Africa. You know, BUSA, the Black Business Council, Bienvenue tout le monde, la Chambre de Commerce en France, thank you for joining us. And even our Scottish friends from the African Scottish Network. Stronger together, guys, but it's good that we can work together. But thank you for joining us, because I think our collective voice as business needs to be heard. We need to be challenging, we need to be critical, but advisory to government. And I think the Solidarity Fund, there's been some misunderstandings around the governance, around where the money goes and around how it's set up, but really is something pretty special. And for me, it's a symbol of the corporate activism in South Africa that is going to be required for us to come out of this. So without further ado, I think I'm going to kick us off with a question really to the audience to get some engagement, to see, how are we feeling about going back to work in level 3 next week? And once we've looked at that, I'll hand over to AD and to Paul, who will tell us more about the Solidarity Fund. So please, just very quickly, share your views and sentiment around how we're feeling about going back to work. And then combined to that, you know, will the move to lockdown level 3 on Monday, you know, will it make a difference to where you work? Will you work from home? I know my team and my colleagues here battling with young children. I've got young teenagers here that require a lot of attention. Do you understand the requirements so that you can open your office? Given the interdependencies of our sectors and businesses, you know, can we actually go back and function and thrive? It would be great to get a sense of what you're all thinking. And perhaps we can share those results. Ema. So interestingly, so on a personal basis, I went into my office this week and I'm itching to get back, but it just looks like a third of our participants are completely comfortable, about a third being moderately comfortable, and then a third would really feeling quite uncomfortable wanting to stay from home. I think if you compare that to the UK, it's quite, so 2/3 of us were keen to go back. In the UK, I think 2/3 are keen to stay at home, but maybe there's something to do with their paid furlough scheme, that it means there's less economic stress about staying at home. And where will the move to level 3 make a difference to where you work? So 2/3 of us still will be working from home. And perhaps again, indicative of the demographic of our members, that we all have the privilege and ability to work from home. That's really interesting and useful to kick us off with. So AD, thank you so much for joining us. I heard you speak last week to the South African Chamber in London and was really inspired and keen to get you on board to share what the Solidarity Fund has been doing here in South Africa, dispel some of the myths and share some of the good work in the way we've really come together as a business community. So over to you, AD.
Thanks very much, Leon. Can everyone see my screen? You can see my screen.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, looks full screen.
Okay. So I'd like to just, I'm going to work with Paul Bondi, who's joined me also from the fund, and just run through a few slides that will hopefully kind of give everyone an idea as to what the Solidarity Fund is and the impact that we've been making in the circa 2 months that we've been in existence. So the first thing to say is, the fund was set up as a way to bring South Africa together behind one consolidated effort to fight COVID-19. And, at the time, there were lots of different discussions about different initiatives, lots of different funds that businesses were wanting to set up, government was wanting to set up its own funds. And the idea was for the country to have a single focused, dedicated fund that everyone could get behind, private sector, individual, civil society, and government. Obviously, since the setup of the Solidarity Fund, the government has set up their own relief efforts and their own funds. And I think, we can talk maybe in the discussion later about there has been some confusion between the Solidarity Fund and some of government's other funds. But hopefully, I will clear that up in my presentation. One of the ideas of the Solidarity Fund is that it would be an agile, rapid response vehicle, that it could respond and make decisions and implement and execute in a way which is much faster than government or other, parastatal agencies could. And the idea is that not that the fund would substitute for the government effort, but that it would complement the government effort, augment the national health response, and also help support those who are kind of affected by the pandemic. So the humanitarian effort, to look at what are the consequences of the health response, what are the consequences of the actions that we're taking on society, and how do we support those who are affected. The fund is an independent organization. We work very closely with government and we work very closely with business, but we're not a business arm and we're not an arm of government. We're completely independent of both. Paul will describe later our board. Our board is on our board. We have people who are in government, in civil society, in the trade unions, and in business. But we operate as an entirely independent entity of all different of all the other sectors of society. The fourth point is, we're a custodian of money that has been donated to us by, tens of thousands of South Africans from all over society, corporates, international donors. We feel a huge responsibility as those people who are looking after the fund, because we're, in a sense, we're accountable to the country. So we're a fund for South Africa, and our beneficiaries are all people who live in South Africa. There are no restrictions on our beneficiaries in terms of, who we're targeting to benefit from the fund. I've mentioned we're independently administered, and we're very committed to governance. We have on our website, and we're going to seek to extend what we have in terms of all of the donations we've received and where that money's come from, and all the disbursements we make and the payments we're going to make. So we're still working on putting onto our website, a lot more detail in relation to disbursements we made, but I'll cover some of it a bit later in the presentation. And then to say that we're really focused, the money we have is quite limited in relation to the national resources that are being mobilized, around the COVID-19 response. The government announced a 20 billion rand augmentation to the health budget. There's the 500 billion rand support package. We've got commitments of just under 3 billion rand. So we're quite small. So we need to make sure that where we spend our money, we're spending it on to have the highest possible impact that we can have. So we're very targeted in where we spend our money. It's got to be on particular initiatives that really would not happen had we not spent our money there. So that kind of additionality is really important to us. We need to have outsized impacts when we spend our money on society, and so that we know that we can, with the interventions we make, need to be absolutely decisive. And I hope you'll agree when I take you through some of the disbursements that we've been making, that we've been consistent with that commitment. So in terms of our mandate, there are really 4 elements of our mandate: prevent, detect, care, and support. So prevent is really about, in our world, about, what is the contribution we can make to helping, the spread of the disease, helping to flatten the curve. Detect is about what is our role in relation to, testing and contact tracing. Care is, for those people who are infected, what is the contribution that we can make to the care of those people. And support is for those people whose lives have been disrupted by the pandemic, what is the nature of the support that we can provide them. And that is in our kind of humanitarian focus. So these are the three areas. I'm going to describe them, but I will describe in more detail a bit later exactly what the initiatives that we've had in each of these areas. But we chose, in relation to our mandate, to focus on these three pillars. So the first pillar is the health response, and this is where we are working very closely with the National Department of Health and with the business health workstream to support one national effort in relation to the health response. We don't want to create like a duplication or to create our own health effort. We're saying that we have to have one effort. We have to have one health effort to address the crisis, and we need to dovetail with that effort and to support that effort. And so, we're working very closely, as I mentioned, with government and business. And I think there's been a very strong integration of the Business Solidarity Fund and government efforts in terms of what needs to be done, where the greatest needs and priorities are. The second pillar is the humanitarian effort, and this is the support part of our mandate. And this is about looking at, what are the most significant humanitarian crises that have been precipitated or exacerbated by COVID. And I think, the two that we've chosen to focus on, the one is food security and hunger, and the other is gender-based violence. I mean, these are obviously humanitarian issues that predate COVID, but have been significantly exacerbated by the COVID crisis. And then the third element of the third pillar of our focus is on the Solidarity Campaign, which is a campaign which is about uniting the nation, but it's about inspiring and mobilizing the resources of the country to combat COVID. And the idea here is that this is not a problem that's going to be solved by government. This requires citizens, communities, businesses, NGOs, government agencies, for us all to act in concert, and everyone has a role to play. And unless we're all acting in concert in that way, it's unlikely that we're really going to be able to mitigate the impact of this crisis. And so this is partly, a campaign to mobilize those resources, but it's also partly a campaign a behavioral change campaign. I mean, we know now that critical as the economy reopens is going to be the wearing of masks, physical distancing, hygiene. These are going to be key if we're going to contain infection rates. And so the behavioral change element of this campaign is a really important part of the Solidarity Campaign. So I'm going to ask Paul to present the next three slides. Paul?
Thank you, Adi. So what we wanted to talk about quickly here is our governance framework. In a pretty short order, we established a full-blown governance architecture, which we've got a sort of summary view on the slides. But to reiterate some of the points that Adi had made up front, which is, these are highly regarded, very skilled and very experienced individuals from business, from government, and from civil society in order to come together and make sure that we are all accountable, and not only to ourselves, but also particularly to the public at large for all our efforts. So with that, all of the machinery, if I can call it that, was put together in short order, and it's at the highest possible standards you would see in any sort of world-class governance structure. There's a fundraising committee that is responsible for ensuring proper oversight. So we have a donor policy. We ensure that we vet our donors and get clarity that we are dealing with the right sort of donors. Very importantly, there's the disbursements committee that makes sure that all disbursements are appropriate and relevant in the context of our mandate. And then very importantly, an audit and risk committee. So I think one can take huge comfort from the very comprehensive governance structure that's been put in place to give, to give the entire effort all the efficacy that it needs and the governance that's essential for an organization such as this. On the next page, we've set out just, I think, three key pillars which are very important. The fund administration and reporting aspect, so Old Mutual on a pro bono basis, and I should add that all of this is done on a pro bono basis, absolutely all of it, including the CEO and the board members. But as far as the administration is concerned, we've contracted with Old Mutual, and they do the full administration of the fund and have a very extensive team supporting the fund's efforts. Monitoring evaluation is absolutely critical for not only the transparency, but also to advise and assist us in looking at the initiatives that are being evaluated. So we need to understand that we are making impacts that we hope to make and that we are monitoring it very closely. And then obviously all the statutory compliance. So it is a PBO. We've got PwC as external auditors, and as a PBO, our accounts will be open for scrutiny and audited appropriately. So with those few words, I'm hoping that we at least give everyone the comfort that there's a complete and detailed governance framework. If we then just turn to the fundraising efforts, and this might be a very busy slide, but let me take you through this bit by bit. To date, we have got pledges around 2.8 billion. We've been very hard at work at collecting those pledges, so we're sitting at around about 2.5 billion worth of pledges actually received. We monitor this, as you can imagine, on a literally a day-to-day basis. And in accordance with our commitment to complete transparency, we obviously keep a donor list. So what we're showing on the top right-hand corner is the top 10 donors by name, and obviously the top 10 payroll giving firms. And this is really an effort that was sparked by the President when he and his cabinet members committed to donate a third of their salaries over 3 months to the fund. So we monitor that very, very closely. All of this information is in the public domain. It is on the website, and we're happy to show that to everybody. I think
Paul, sorry, could I perhaps jump in there? Just, I mean, the EFF being the top funders, that's quite an interesting stat. But equally, just to the audience, I should have mentioned, please feel free to post any questions as we're talking in the Q&A section of the Zoom, and we will address those towards the end of the presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, Leon, it certainly is interesting. So as other organizations or political organizations contributors to the fund.
Yeah.
What we do monitor very closely is forecasting. Obviously the demand requirements with the supply in the form of available resources. So we watch that on a daily basis as well. For me, I think the one very key aspect of what the fund's been able to achieve, all the distributions which AD will talk through shortly, is that we've been able to mobilize, just over 184,000 South Africans who've made a donation to the fund, and I think that sort of underscores the solidarity effort when we get donations coming in from as many people. To a large extent, that is really through the various funding partners. There are a number of them, and they make this a very seamless and easy exercise for donors to contribute. But our efforts, our total fundraising efforts, really do cover off corporates, because that's where we get the bulk of the funding, and that's where we think that it sort of makes sense, because they, like us, are very concerned about the impact the virus has had and will indeed have. So it is, there's an alignment of objectives there with corporates. We also very ecstatic by the fact that foreign companies, the multinationals, have started to contribute, because I think they operate in this environment and this market. They understand the impact of this on us, and so they too are looking for a vehicle such as this, which can provide them with comfort that the money is going to be appropriately deployed and make a difference. And then there's obviously the foundations, and some of the top donors are actually foundations, because they rely on the fund's ability to identify the specific areas that we can add maximum value. So it is a very big effort. There's a very big team behind this, putting it all together and ensuring that we sort of deliver on our mandate in terms of fundraising. But I would add that the ask is still very big. I mean, the need is significant, and so we will continue pounding away at trying to raise as much funding as we possibly can, because what we do know is that we like to believe we're making a difference, but the reality is that the need is really, really big. So with that, I will hand back to Adi to give you a bit more about the activities of the fund on the ground.
Thanks very much, Paul. I mean, so just to say, because I think, I mean, Paul mentioned it, but it's really important to note, we have over 80 people working pretty much full-time on the fund now. We have probably 20 organizations that are providing services to the fund. We have not spent a single cent in the fund on any expenses. The only money that's been spent has been on the direct impact and opportunities and disbursements that I'm going to describe to you now. So, we've created a very kind of, a frictionless vehicle in terms of, you don't have salaries and board fees, and there literally are zero expenses in this fund. Even the bank accounts that we have are charge-free bank accounts. So, I mean, corporates and businesses and individuals have really come to the party in terms of making the contribution to the fund. So we just look at the impact we've had. I mean, we've been going for just over 2 months. Not only, as you would have seen from Paul's slides, I mean, we've built an institution. I mean, it's just the speed at which this has happened has just been kind of mind-blowing. But not, while we've been building that institution, we've been obviously very focused on having, the biggest impact that we can have. So I'm just going to kind of run you through, some of these impact initiatives. So the first one around Prevent, this is like, the contribution that we can have to flattening the curve. We've had a significant intervention across all media forms with a campaign that's been focused on different messaging. Obviously, during the lockdown, it was focused on staying at home. A big focus now has been, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've run a radio campaign in 12 languages across the entire country in 15 local radio stations with 10-minute inserts every day. And it's going to run for the next six weeks. And these inserts are around helping to kind of demystify the virus in people's minds. So explain what it's about, using local doctors. What do you do if you get sick? The importance of social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a mass communication campaign. You can see, I mean, in the top left-hand side, it's a tiny portion of our total spend because we've had so much pro bono contributions, corporates giving us advertising slots. We've had a whole TBWA, Hunt Lascara's team, probably of 7 or 8 people working full-time on this for no money. So we've had incredible support, DSTV giving us slots and SABC. But we've spent we've committed 7 million rand for production for these radio programs that go out nationally. We're about to spend more money in this area. We think that the kind of area of communication and behavioral change is an area which is very well suited to the fund. No one else can run a major national behavioral change campaign. So we've got a major focus on this at the moment. We have a whole team of people working on this and working with key trusted networks in society who are going to help us do this. So the churches, the traditional leaders, schools and teachers and parents, youth groups, civil society organizations. So this is going to become, a much bigger part of our story, but has been a really important focus to date. If we look at Detect, so this is around testing, and you all know that getting testing right is absolutely critical to dealing with the crisis. If you don't have testing, good testing programs in place, then you don't know what's happening with the virus. It's very hard to do. You can't do contact tracing. And we have been in that situation. South Africa has really been struggling with testing. We approved a 250 million rand grant to the National Health Laboratory Services, probably like 10 days after our formation, to help them. That would enable them to double their procurement of test kits. Unfortunately, they've really struggled to procure test kits in the international markets, which means we've really been lagging. You'll see the bottom right-hand graph. We've really been lagging in tests. I mean, that grant is still, still in place for them, but they haven't drawn down on the grant because they haven't been able to get the test kits that they need. We've now recently approved, Paul can correct me, I think it's a 90 million rand or 80 million rand grant to the academic laboratories. These are the laboratories of the universities across the country that have the capacity. And that's going to add a third to our current testing capacity as a country. So, this is a really important contribution to help ramp up testing. We've got a huge problem at the moment where test results are taking anywhere from 4 to 14 days to get back. Hospitals are getting clogged with people who are waiting for their test results. So getting testing right is critically important. And I think, you know, we're playing a really important role in helping to support the national effort on testing. In relation to care, this is kind of when people get into the hospitals and looking after people who have been affected. When we started, the big crisis in the country was around the absence of protective equipment for frontline healthcare workers. That was the kind of single greatest challenge that we faced. And, you know, it has taken the government procurement system 2 months to get themselves up and ready, you know, to do this. Within the first 7 days of the formation of the fund, we approved our first 100 million rand facility for the procurement of PPE. A few days later, we increased that to 300 million rand. It moved to 670 million rand. We then approved 145 million rand of procurement of PPE for the people doing government testing, and a further 90 million rand for PPE for community healthcare workers who are operating in the non-state system. So, you know, we've done almost R1 billion of PPE procurement. I mean, not all of that you'll see on the right-hand side, on the bottom right-hand side is how that, you know, flows through. But the fund has largely dealt with the shortfall of PPE in the country, probably until the end of June. The country needs about 8 billion rand of PPE to see ourselves through the crisis. So obviously our 1 is a small part of the total 8. But we came in and we did what is required of us as a kind of rapid response, highly agile vehicle to get in fast, get into an incredibly difficult global PPE procurement market, using the best resources we could find out of the private sector with, you know, procurement, supply chain, health, you know, distribution and logistics, to, you know, working with Business for South Africa, who set up their procurement infrastructure to do this procurement. I mean, I think this has been, you know, a really phenomenal achievement by the fund. And then the final area has been in the humanitarian space, where we've been completely focused on the issue of hunger and food relief. Now, again, a little bit like PPE, but even more so, the issue of kind of food security is something which is, you know, it's a problem which is much bigger than the problem that the fund can solve. You know, this requires billions and billions every month to deal with this. So our conversation with government around this was, you know, we can do an urgent emergency rapid relief intervention, but you're going to have to pick up on a much bigger response to deal with the issue of food security in the country. And so our initiative was we wanted it to be comprehensive, to go across the whole country, was to provide food parcels to 250,000 families and food vouchers to another 50,000 families. You'll see by the 25th of May, we had actually exceeded our targets. We had provided food parcels to more than 250,000 families, and we're now in the process of rolling out our food voucher program with the South African Council of Churches. We implemented this program with the large national food organizations, food NGOs, working with over 400 local community-based organizations, faith-based organizations who knew, you know, the most vulnerable families and how to get the food parcels to them. To a large extent, we were not impacted by, we managed to kind of manage around some of the issues that a number of the other food parcel distribution programs had, in terms of it getting appropriated by politicians and all of that kind of thing. And so, you know, I mean, really pleased with how this program has gone. And I think it must be one of the largest, you know, single kind of food relief efforts in the country. You know, we estimated that coming into the crisis, there were probably 1 million food insecure individuals in South Africa. And that obviously, you know, went up dramatically. And even this intervention of ours is only a kind of 2 to 3 week intervention. And so what we're hoping here is that government's cash grant system, which is going to be 7 or 8 billion rand a month, when that kicks in, that's going to, you know, significantly alleviate the situation. And then we will again relook at what are the interventions that we can make to help complement the government efforts. So that's in essence, you know, the work that we've been doing. I mean, hopefully we've kind of conveyed to you that we've really taken the task of building an institution seriously and making sure that we've got proper governance and processes and money is properly spent. We're a fund that has, its beneficiaries are all South Africans, and we've been really focused on having the biggest impact that we can possibly have, you know, in the 2 months that we've been in existence. And I think, you know, still have a really important role to play as this crisis unfolds. we've run a little bit over. I'm sorry about that, Leon, but thanks very much.
No, AD and Paul, thank you for the energy, the passion, but equally what you guys have achieved in establishing this with its governance structures, you know, all entirely funded and organized on pro bono work from the private sector is truly remarkable. I think what we'll do is we have a few questions coming up. If I hand over to my colleague Cecilia, we can perhaps take some questions from the audience before addressing some more key themes. Just unmute this. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I've got toddlers in the background, is all I can say. We've had some good questions come in, some that we've been expecting. I think we can start with MJ Schumacher, who asked particularly, and this might be relevant, Paul, for you and for Adi to answer. He was asking, is there any partnering or collaboration with other funds, example, eMedia's COVID-19 Relief Fund, to ensure that the funding spread is balanced and structured?
Certainly there's room to collaborate and partner with other associations and funds. And in fact, a good example of that is in some of the PPE that we were, procurement that we were involved in at the outset was partnering with, you know, the likes of the Motsepe Foundation and others. So the concept of partnering to achieve a particular outcome on a rapid response basis is something we have done and will do that as long as it makes sense. So yes, absolutely.
I think that's, you mentioned PPE specifically. That actually speaks to a question we've had from Marlon Burgess, asking, will the fund increase its efforts to try and make up for the gap in funding for PPE as the pandemic peaks? Don't know if that's something that you've strategized around.
Yeah, so yes. Maybe I can answer that, Cecilia. So, I mean, we've done a lot of work and continue to do work with government to make sure that the PPE procurement that is going to, the PPE that's going to be required in the peak months, and the peak months are going to be July, August, September in all likelihood. You know, the procurement we've been doing is not going to deal with the demand during those months. The procurement we've been doing has dealt with the kind of early phases of this crisis. And so, you know, the messages that we've been receiving from government, and you would have heard Minister Makiza earlier on this week talking about the confidence that government has that PPE procurement is in place, that the PPE stocks will be there. You know, this is something that's obviously very important to us and to the country. I mean, it's vitally important that those PPE stocks are there. And so we continue to engage with government to check that those procurement systems are working effectively, to see what role that we may be able to play to help support them in that effort. But at this stage, we don't see any significant further role for ourselves unless there are issues in government PPE procurement, in which case we'll have to figure out how to deal with that. But obviously remember that we've spent $1 billion of the 3 billion rand that we have available on PPE. And so, you know, one then has to think about, you know, what are the trade-offs? If we're spending more money on PPE, what are we not doing? And is that, obviously the question we always ask ourselves is this, if we're going to spend this money on this, is this the biggest possible impact that we can make? And we don't want to be a kind of a small drop in a much bigger ocean. But there may be some selective procurement that is still required, but that we'll look at as and when it becomes necessary.
And just Adrian, if I can keep you on the line here, we've also just had a question on that from Rob from one of our security companies, but that they have a wide range of services from Quadrant. He says they've attempted to work with international partners to assist with the supply of PPE and rapid test kits, but with either slow or no progress. Government has openly admitted to being short on test kits, which obviously frustrates those trying to assist with supply. Do you have any advice on how to provide support?
Yeah, so in relation to the test kits and to PPE, I mean, so remember the fund, we don't have our own executing capacity and infrastructure. You know, even though we've got 80 people, it's a lean organization, and so we look to leverage off infrastructure in society that is going to be able to execute and implement. And so obviously with procurement, it's been with Business for South Africa, and with the food campaign, it was with civil society organizations. in relation to the testing and PPE, our partner with that is the Business for South Africa Health Workstream and the procurement office that they've set up. So that would be the organization to speak to about these things. They work very closely with the Department of Health, but anything that's going to be about fast tracking, testing solutions or other things. I know that the government have been doing a lot of experiments with these rapid testing systems, and I was on a call with Professor Karim earlier this week. There's a huge amount of skepticism about the efficacy of those tests. Very high numbers of false positives and negatives, and so the reliability of the rapid tests and of the antibody tests, is apparently, according to the kind of the government, very questionable at this stage, and so that may be one of the reasons why there's pushback. But I would suggest that he speaks to the Business for South Africa Health Workstream team.
Okay, and we can certainly help to put you in touch with them, Rob. So that's I think we can touch base on that after the webinar. You touch on something else, Adrian, where you say the reliability of some of these test kits. Interestingly, Terence Naidu from Truzo says that they've seen a rise in scams with the procurement of PPEs through their platform. And how is the fund protecting itself from these scams that are out there? Have you possibly come across any of this? Have you had some experience?
We have come across a few attempts. So firstly, to say, PPE procurement is, this is like one of the most complex things you can imagine at this particular point in time. You've got every country around the world, you've got businesses from all over the world, everyone's trying to procure kits. There's a very limited supply and you've got massive demand. And so in that, you've got a lot of fraud happening, you've got a lot of defective equipment that's being sold. What we've done to try to mitigate that risk is to work with reputable suppliers, so that we have counterparties who we believe in, and to make sure that that all products are properly inspected and for the necessary standards, South African standards, before we make payment. So we don't make, so we're not buying directly from China. So we don't have a situation of we make payment and then we have to go and try and claim our money back from China. I was on a call with a group from the US who had bought 3 million masks out of China and they'd all come with no straps on them. And now you've got your recourse is very limited. Whereas for us, we've got South African suppliers at this stage up until now. Obviously, you'll see that the bulk of our procurement is still coming through, but we do inspections in China as well, and we do inspections when they arrive in South Africa. So at this stage, we've been able to avoid those pitfalls, and hopefully our systems and processes are robust and secure enough to make sure that that continues.
Perhaps at this point, I spoke, sorry to interrupt, Cecilia. I spoke with Terence yesterday, who is, as you know, has been working with the DIT in terms of taking his product to the UK, which again, on top of this and in the post-COVID world, we really want to double down on our bilateral trade between South Africa and the UK. Terence is part of that. Terence, I've just unmuted you. I'm not sorry to put you on the spot, but just very briefly share the story of the money you saved a client yesterday because of the technology you can offer in terms of procurement.
Yeah, it was literally last week. Thanks, Leon. It was literally last week. We've had around 146.5 million rand worth of PPEs being transacted through our digital escrow product. So essentially, we're an escrow service provider. We've digitized our product and created an app for it, where we hold the buyer's funds securely in trust. And only when the service provider delivers the goods or services and the buyer's happy with it and confirms that it works and that type of stuff, do we release the payment. So we've had quite a few successful transactions, but last week we had one which was the largest transaction we've seen so far, for 450 million rand plus minus, and it was the procurement of gloves. The supplier had a fantastic website, sent pictures and videos of the goods, of the product in a warehouse. And because we're FSCA registered and regulated, we do the whole KYC and compliance checks. When we started doing the compliance checks on the supplier, we realized that the company doesn't even exist. So I was just as surprised as you guys. 450 million rand. the buyer was ready to place the funds in our escrow platform for delivery. But we've seen so many smaller type of transactions go through where buyers funded their transactions as well, and just the service providers just don't deliver. And the escrow mechanism and product that we have is just the perfect example of how you can safeguard procurement at this stage.
Now, Terence, thank you. And I think, through our members, through our collaboration with the Solidarity Fund and Business for South Africa, we can collectively ensure the funds and the services get to where they need to get to. And I think that's going to be critical for any upcoming UK government investment as well. Thanks, Terence. Maybe Cecilia, one or two final...
provide that free of charge. This is all of us working together to do something amazing. We're not looking to take any fees on it right now.
No, thanks so much, Terence. Cecilia, maybe one or two questions, then we'll move on to a poll, and then I will move forward with some more themes. Was there anything from the audience just we could share?
Yeah, just a few more around the assistance of the fund, but also I think this is a tricky one. I think as you've made clear in your presentation, the Solidarity Fund is very much focused on assisting on a broader societal basis. However, we do have a very big need from small, medium enterprises not really receiving any assistance. So there have been some questions around what can possibly be done to support these businesses. And also, of course, there's the thing about white-owned businesses. There have been questions around, is there some kind of support available to them, since we know that most of the government funding have some BEE requirements. So if the panel can comment on that.
Okay. Thanks. So yeah, I'm happy that those questions have come up, because there's been a lot of confusion about this, and I think also because in the beginning you had the Rupert and Oppenheimer donations, and they were for supporting small businesses, and so there was a perception that the fund was going to be set up to support small businesses, but neither of those donations came through the fund. So you'll see from the focus areas that we've chosen, small business is not a focus of the fund at this stage. Now, clearly, one of our mandates is, to support those who've been affected by COVID-19. And we know that there are, hundreds of thousands of small businesses across the country that have been affected by this. And the situation, is critical. The issue there for us is that, we just don't think that that's a problem that we can really meaningfully impact on. I mean, the scale of that problem is at such a level that we wouldn't be able to even begin to kind of process the needs that are out there. And so it's not that we don't think it's important, it's just that we don't think that that's a problem that we can really meaningfully contribute to or impact on, which is why, so that it's not off our agenda. And, our board has said, we need to continue to think about, is there a role that we can play in this space? But up until now, we just haven't seen the opportunity for what we can do given our limited resources. In relation to the beneficiary issue, so one of the things that's happened, and I'm pleased you raised this, because there's been confusion in the market about the government solidarity small business funds and the Solidarity Fund. So the government set up two funds, a small business fund and an SMME, and a tourism fund, in addition to obviously their much bigger 500 billion rand support package. And those two funds have certain BE criteria that they use when assessing applications. And so there was a perception that we were applying these criteria in how we applied our funds, and was a confusion of these funds, because firstly, we don't have any criteria in our beneficiaries. Our beneficiaries are all people who live in South Africa. It's not actually even all South Africans, because we were providing food parcels to foreign nationals who were living here. We're providing to, the people who had the greatest need. So we have no restrictions on our beneficiaries. We're a fund for all of South Africa. And we're not a fund that supports small businesses. So I think it's just really important to kind of clarify that, because we've had, a lot of people getting angry with us because, we're only supporting Black businesses and things. And it's a total kind of misapprehension about, or confusion between what government funds are trying to do and what we're trying to do. We're independent. We're not part of government. We have a totally separate mandate and a completely different focus.
I just think we really need to underline and label that point. You're independent. There's no BE criteria. You will help who we think we need to help. And it's us as the business community running this. And again, I don't think we can say that enough. We can retweet it and share that afterwards as well.
Yeah, but I think it's important to address that, because as you said, there is a lot of confusion around that. I just wanted to also comment, again, we've had a few questions from small business owners, Henrietta, specifically from a guest house in Stellenbosch, also MJ Schumacher, who mentioned about how can we help small businesses on not just funding, but just on running their operations to, you know, how can they continue to pay staff, cover their overheads? Is there someone who can support them? From my side, I wanted to add that this is a good time to join up with your local business chambers. I think through our networks and fellow members that you might not even know are right on your doorstep, we found that this is the time to really pull together and help each other with these kinds of services. And we can certainly also help with some consulting and passing along of ideas, also just putting you in touch with the right people who can help you very quickly in the best possible way. So if that maybe addresses some of it. Henrietta, for example, we've got members who particularly deal with the TERS UIF payments that you were asking about.
Yeah.
We can put you in touch with them and they get results. Where I know it's sitting where you're sitting, it seems like an impossible process. So we'll get in touch with you afterwards specifically, and we'll try and help you in any way that we can as a business chamber.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think the purpose for chambers, and that's why we've invited our fellow chambers from the other international network to join us, because collectively, I believe within our networks, we can provide a great deal of assistance. And I know from a TERS perspective, it was almost impossible to get a response if you were trying to do that by yourself. But if you're supported by a large organization, we can get some results. And any comments or observations, Paul Adey, there in terms of if you are a small business, a guest house in Stellenbosch? I know it's not necessarily the purpose of the fund, but just some observations and advice and support.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the key thing is to see what in the government's support package, companies can access. The government has launched a 200 billion rand loan support or loan guarantee fund through the banks. And the idea of that is to get 200 billion rand to small businesses, in the coming months. And the target is businesses with a turnover of less than 200 million rand, I think 250 or 150. But these are the kind of businesses you're talking about. And so, what ought to be the case is that, and perhaps, the chamber can also help with this, or help, businesses in terms of, accessing these loans from the banks. But all of these businesses who've got a relationship with the bank should be having a conversation that says, listen, we need additional credit. That credit should be provided on very favorable terms, because the idea behind that 200 billion rand facility is that the banks are not going to make any profit out of it. I mean, they're prohibited from making profit out of it. So this is really about supporting small businesses. And so, I think that if that money, if that liquidity had to kind of flow into the small business sector, I think that would have a very significant impact. I think the other thing that is worth kind of pointing out is that, because I get approached a lot by, small business owners in remote towns and communities where there's huge kind of suffering and food insecurity and they're battling to continue to provide food parcels they need to get as many people as possible onto the government relief system, the cash grant system. So this is not only for people who are currently receiving cash grants. This is for anyone who's been affected by COVID, who've lost their job, or lost their income, are eligible for these cash grants. Now, whether the Department of Social Development is going to be able to implement this at the scale, in the time available, remains to be seen. But the point is that infrastructure was set up for that. So I think, and it could be staff members who, they can no longer afford to pay. It could be, obviously the TERS scheme is there, is there for that. But just generally, people who are really struggling, small businesses can also help get those people access to those government grants.
Yeah,
I would just add that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just add that I think Business for South Africa has SMMEs as one of its many work streams, and maybe there's an opportunity for people to get support, not funded support, but actually get advice and input from Business for South Africa.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think I'm going to drive on, and what we will do after this is Cecilia and I will connect with Business for South Africa to ensure we've got a smooth channel and can really benefit from what they're doing as well and advise them. It's great to see the interactivity and the questions coming through. I would like to push on and perhaps invite Emma to share our next poll question with the members. And I think, given what we've heard from Paul and Adi, how is the fund doing? Is it spending on the right things? You know, let's be critical. Kyle, I can see your suggestions there that you're sharing with everybody. Thank you. So in the chat as well, there are some suggestions for other sources of funding. But you know, while we have Adi and Paul with us, you know, in our trusted Chatham House Rule webinar, let's share our feedback. Is the fund spending on the right things? I think that there's a couple more questions relating to this as well, Emma. Well, while that's percolating, and I preach, there you go. Is it an effective vehicle to help South Africa combat the broader societal impact of COVID? And for me, one of my biggest concerns is COVID in itself obviously is a cause of concern, but I have been fascinated and staggered by the global mobilization and shutdown and almost deliberate destruction of economies to combat COVID, when we've had other pandemics and epidemics that have had a far higher death rate and a far higher impact on our global economies. You know, if we just take seasonal flu, if we take TB, if we take malnutrition, the death rates are much higher. So something that has befuddled me and baffled me is, why is the world really coalesced around this particular case? And I think the fallout, because of the economic lockdown that was put in place, we believe for the right reasons, is actually going to be greater than the COVID itself. But what do you think? And I believe there's one more, Emma, that you want to share.
Leon, can I just make a comment? Yeah. Just, I mean, in relation
Please
to what you
jump in, Adi. Yes.
I mean, while people are responding to the polls, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's undisputed that, you know, the impact of the health response, in other words, the impact of the response to the health crisis, you know, is causing, you know, suffering and you know, damage to livelihoods and so on, you know, at an unprecedented kind of scale, certainly kind of in our lifetimes. So, and I think, you know, we need to appreciate that, you know, no one wants to destroy the economy and no one wants people to die, you know, of COVID-19. And so I think this is a difficult, you know, a difficult thing to wrestle with. I would say that, you know, to your point about, you know, what this crisis has kind of engendered in us, you know, what's been interesting about the fund is that, and I think we will find this in this crisis, is that there are new ways in which we're working that hopefully kind of create opportunities for us to think about how we solve problems in future in society. I mean, if you think about what the fund has been able to do, I think the reason why we've been able to move with the speed and have the impact we've been able to have is that we haven't been constrained by the, you know, the many constraints that government sits with, or, you know, other institutions in society, and we can leverage off the infrastructure that has the capacity to get things done. You know, in the case of procurement, the infrastructure in Business for South Africa is the best infrastructure in the country to do PPE procurement, in our view. Otherwise, we would have used someone else. The infrastructure and the relationships and the deep knowledge and understanding of local communities that exist in civil society is the best capacity and infrastructure in society to deliver on humanitarian, you know, support and relief. And so that is why we partnered with them. And so I think that, you know, creating new ways of working, new ways of leveraging off the capacity in society to actually make things happen, to make an impact, to have a difference. You know, I'm hoping that what comes out of this crisis is new ways of working for us as a country that enables us to, you know, to solve some of the problems that have felt kind of intractable in the past.
Yeah. No, Adi, I agree that it's one of the silver linings I've noticed, and I've often spoken about the kind of responsible, sustainable capitalism that I actually see in South Africa compared to my time in the UK. I think corporate South Africa business you know, we get labeled as being greedy capitalists, but the amount of bursaries we produce, our tax rands, you know, we've got a tax base of 2.8 million, and a lot of that is the business feeding circa 65 million. So, you know, I'm very pro-business and I'm pro-sustainable business, and that's why I really want to harness these business networks and be this critical, vibrant voice that is just not sitting back and hiding at home, waiting for COVID to go away, to say, let's come together, let's raise funds, and let's deploy those funds effectively. And I know my friend from Carte Blanche is listening, Masa Kakana, and I know we're going to talk about this because we want to communicate this very broadly to the South, to South Africa, but also to the world. Let's look at some of those poll results. I think they might be encouraging for our friends from the Solidarity Fund. Can you perhaps share those first results, Emma? So, are you spending money in the right things? I think that counts. If we're taking a matriculant or IEB exam, that's a distinction in terms of what you're doing. So well done, with a 88% saying yes and 12% room for improvement. I'd have been more critical, 80%, but you know, well done. That's good to see you. And we need to share some of this good news to overcome some of the cynicism and encourage more funding. Is it impactful? Yes, we are. Wow. Great. Again, and listen to my journalistic colleagues and to Carte Blanche listening. This is the good news about business fighting back that we want to share with South Africa. Excellent. And was there a final one, Emma? Well, there you go. So I'm conscious that when we create an environment and a network, we might all be on the same page, having drank the same Kool-Aid, creating our own echo chamber. But here we've got a representation of corporate South Africa, SMEs, we have the media, and I think we're all really pleased with what the Solidarity Fund is doing. So, well done to yourself, Adi, and to Paul. And I do think there's much room for improvement, as some of our kind of guests have suggested, and working with Terence and working with Quadrant and what Carl suggested, I think we can improve. We're coming into the final stages, but let's spend the next 10, 15 minutes just addressing perhaps some more tactical, practical questions. And I have been critical, you know, with Kim Reed, we were bemoaning why e-commerce took so long to be activated. And Minister Patel, we pushed back and he listened to us eventually and suggested it was his idea all along, which is fine. E-commerce is now working. But Kim Reed needs to grow his business now to address the new need. And he can't get skilled workers in from Germany to build the AI technology that's going to enable this new world that we discuss. So what are those practical things we're worried about? And I'm interested in perhaps what the audience thinks, but equally to Adi and to Paul. Business is going to go back next week. Lockdown restrictions are going to be released. Are we prepared to go back to work? You know, the schools are open, but my son goes to boarding school. I've just looked at what the boarding school restrictions are. It's like he's going to go to some sanitized laboratory, futuristic dystopian prison. You know, can we really start becoming economically active? So perhaps we could discuss that whilst reflecting on what are the sectors that we really need to work on. I'm worried about tourism. Such a big part of South Africa. It employs 100,000 people. I want to come to Stellenbosch and go to a wine farm with you, Adi, because I enjoy it, but I'm worried about the workers there and the impact that's going to have in 2 to 3 years. So just in terms of that kind of work readiness piece, what are the audience thinking? Put up your questions. And what are you observing, Paul and Adi, through the fund?
So maybe I could kick off, Leon. Sorry, Cecilia.
No, go for it.
Okay. No, I was going to say, you know, one of the other interesting things in this presentation from Professor Karim this week is that you know, this virus is going to be with us for a long time. I mean, we're talking about years, not months, and obviously the next 6 months are going to be pretty torrid. You know, we've got rapidly rising infection rates, rising death rates, and that's going to continue, you know, well into July and probably August. And so, you know, we can't put everything on hold indefinitely. So, you know, I think in some ways, like, we have no choice. We have to reopen. We have to get back to work. And I think, you know, the critical things as we do so, and you know, that was his point about schools, is, you know, if you say we have to wait at schools until it feels safer, you're going to wait 2 years before anyone goes back to school. Okay, and so you can't do that. So we have to reopen. We have to do this, but we have to do this in a responsible way. And you know, the key things that you know, and now I'm not with my Solidarity Fund hat on, but you know, speaking as someone from business, the key things that as a country we need to do, we need proper workplace safety. We need safety on public transport. We need proper testing and tracing. We need proper isolation, sufficient isolation and quarantine centers. We need to use focus on specific hotspots in a very smart way to be able to contain flare-ups as they rise. We need to be able to think about how we isolate the people who are kind of most vulnerable in society. And critically, as I was talking about earlier, we need a massive behavioral change campaign to get people to do the things that are going to help to contain infections. And now, what is that going to do? That's not going to get rid of the virus. The virus is going to move through the population. Okay, that's a given. It's a question over what period of time, and how do we manage that curve as low as we can, so that the reason for all those measures is to manage the rate of infection so that our health services can cope with it. I mean, that's essentially the game that we're playing here. And so I think, there's a call in that to all of us as people who run businesses and who are involved in the economy and involved in different parts of society, to say, this is what we need to do. We're moving into a phase, lockdown was easy. We all just kind of stayed home. Not easy, but now we're required to do things. We're required to make sure that our workplaces are safe. We're required to think about what happens when people who work for us get sick. We have to think about public transport and these other things. So contact tracing for members of staff who get sick. So I think this is the challenge for this next phase for the country is very significant. And I think how we respond to it is going to really determine how we manage our way through this crisis.
Yeah, if I could just add in there, I mean, I think that what is clear is we're coming out of lockdown for all the right reasons at a time when we have yet to peak, whereas other countries who are coming out of lockdown have already peaked. So we've got to assume that the next couple of months are going to be really, really torrid, as Eddie says. I think it's a point in time now, a pre-lockdown phase, where we as South Africans and as business has to take responsibility. And that's the reality. I think there's little reliance you can place on others to manage this. I think it's something that needs to be managed internally, because in reality it's going to be around for years to come. And so as business, we need to take responsibility for ourselves, for our employees, and for our customers. I mean, that's the reality.
Thanks, Paul. You were going to come in there, Cecilia.
It was just as you were mentioning about tourism industry, we did have another question from Raul Aronsa, saying specifically this is a sector that is arguably the hardest hit, and especially as they have to continue to wait. There are very few options for people in this industry as it stands. So he was asking, for support, just also how can anyone help them in this specific period? We know that recovery timelines for different sectors of the economy are going to be different, but specifically when it comes to tourism, how can they still sustain and create jobs during this time? And speaking of the immediate future where they're not able to operate at all at this stage. Anyone has some comments on that?
I mean, that's really difficult, I mean, I'm also involved in a number of tourism businesses. One of our investments and beyond, we've got 35 lodges across Africa. Every single one of them is closed. We've got 2,500 people that we pay every month. And we depend on European and American travelers flying to Africa. When is that going to happen again? Big question mark. So I'm afraid, I just don't think that I think that the purpose of these government schemes is to try to help businesses like this see their way through these down cycles. And I think, the only thing to do is to try and draw on the support that government is providing to the extent that it is providing it. And this, I think, particularly through the banks, because 98% of government support for small businesses is going to be through the banks. It's not going to be through their funds. The tourism and the small business fund are actually a distraction because they're a tiny amount of money. And very few businesses can really benefit from that, just given their scale, compared to the 200 billion rand that's going through the bank. So that's all I can suggest is that, I think for all of us, involved in tourism, we need to just think about how we see our way through this, how we manage our costs, and how we deal with staff in the best way that we can to see our way through this crisis. And it's difficult to know when we come out on the other side. When are people going to start traveling again? I mean, I'm hoping that at least, you know, South African travel will start, you know, in the next few months, and at least we will be able to get some kind of, you know, hospitality operations opened, you know, even with kind of physical distancing, but at least to start to generate some kind of revenue. But it's difficult to tell as we sit here today.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've got a question actually, and perhaps we need someone from a healthcare industry to maybe comment more accurately on this. But you mentioned about the effects of the pandemic and the pandemic itself, the virus that will be with us for a very long time, for 1 to 2 years. It's hard to say at this stage. I suspect that there are others thinking along the same lines as me, just wondering, what about the previous SARS, MERS outbreaks, swine flu pandemics that also went global? There were no projections of the world changing for these pandemics for 1 to 2 years post the outbreak of swine flu or anything. So I think there's a big question mark, and definitely in the minds of many of the public members. How are we responding to this, and this projection of how long it will be with us? Where does that come from, and where were those projections with previous pandemics? It's a question that I certainly have. I don't know if I see Amanda is still online, but I'll give the panelists maybe a time to respond. Otherwise, we can go to Amanda as well.
I mean, just very, very briefly, I mean, I think the thing that all the scientists say is that no one is an expert on COVID. I mean, this thing has never been seen before. I mean, obviously it's related to, you know, to other coronaviruses, but it's behaving in a way which is totally different to what they would expect. I mean, how young people get infected, are affected by it. You know, they don't know whether you become immune once you've had it. I mean, there's so much that's unknown about it. And so I think that's really the thing. So it's really hard to say, you know, what things are going to look like 2 years from now or 3 years from now with any degree of certainty, I would say. I mean, I think you know, and it's the kind of thing, I suppose, like in 12 months time, we'll be looking back with the benefit of hindsight and saying, you know, there were lots of things that we did that we shouldn't have done. Almost certainly. I mean, it's highly unlikely we'll look back and say, we made all the right decisions. But I think the important point here is that there's a lot that's unknown about this virus.
Yeah. I think, Amanda, if you can maybe comment. Amanda, just everyone works for Msenzi Healthcare, working with quite a few health brands. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on this, Amanda.
From a virus perspective, Cecilia, the projections are coming from what has happened previously, if that makes sense. So if you do go back through the other outbreaks, you can see there's an 18 to 24 month period, often with a second wave that comes through in terms of viruses. That said, we didn't really interfere nearly as much last time, if that makes sense. So it's an 18 to 24 month clearance period, as long as you let it clear. We're not letting it clear. We're actually holding it, if that makes sense. So there are practices we're engaging in that we didn't engage in for previous outbreaks. We're pouring disinfectant over everything. We're keeping people at home. We're not letting the virus run its course, if that makes, am I making sense? In terms of how it would do normally. So it could be longer in that effect. What would normally happen is the virus would get up into the atmosphere. Aside from people boarding planes, the virus would travel the world and it would run its way through the entire population of the world. We're holding it hostage at the moment. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out, because we've dabbled and we've impacted a lot more things than we would have done ordinarily.
Yeah, no, thanks, Amanda. I know you and I and Cecilia will discuss this at length.
Yes.
And Amanda's got a fascinating background in microbiology, epidemiology, and research back in the HIV early days. So an authority on that. And I think we should do something perhaps more health specific with yourself and with some of Terence's businesses as well. I think we're kind of coming to the end of this. We've overrun, which is brilliant, and I can feel the appetite for more questions. I think maybe a final pull before we have our concluding comments as panelists, Emma, around our appetite for travel. With Santa Fe yesterday, and thanks again, Ruth, for inviting me, the CEO was talking about actual business travel in South Africa starting next week, albeit with Perpex glass isolations in economy class. And I'm looking forward to getting down to the Cape and doing some business and hopefully having dinner in a socially distanced restaurant so that we can actually, just get the world moving again and remind ourselves of our own humanity. But what is the general appetite for air travel? I think this is just, and perhaps a nice way to see us out. I'm also reasonably optimistic, and I wonder if our friends from the German chamber on the call, they're invited. Lufthansa have announced they will be flying to Joburg, Tel Aviv, Dubai. Wow. So again, personally, I'm very comfortable, but our members are largely uncomfortable about traveling. So again, that's very real. So there is a business case, and there is still that kind of concern around the healthcare impact. That's important. Thank you for that. So we're coming to the end of this, and perhaps I can invite all our panelists, Cecilia, Paul, and Adi, just to have some concluding comments in terms of where you think the fund is right now, what we really can do urgently as a business community, and perhaps let's just finish on one silver lining that we've all seen.
Who do you want to start, Jan?
It looks like you volunteered, Adi. Looks like you volunteered there,
Okay, I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I think where the fund is now is, I think we've come through like a period of just, intensity. I mean, I've never worked as hard as I have in the last 2 months. It's just been insane. The hours and the effort that everyone has put in. I think thinking about, going forward, obviously, we're moving into a different phase of the crisis now. I think, the behavioral change campaign is going to be really critically important. I think in the humanitarian space, there's going to be a lot to do. The gender-based violence issue is something that we're still, looking to do something really meaningful on. In the health area, I think the big intervention, maybe is around testing, but we'll look at other things as the state's response to the crisis kind of unfolds. I mean, also just to say, we're learning as we're going as well. I mean, the fund doesn't have the answers. I mean, we suppose like everyone else in this thing, we're trying to do the best that we can. I mean, we all feel like this huge responsibility, everyone who works in the fund, we feel this incredible trust that's been placed on us by all these South Africans and corporates. And we want to make sure that we don't mess up, that's not to say that we won't, but everyone on this call can just know that, night and day, we eat, sleep, breathe this thing, and to try to make sure that we have the biggest impact that we do, and we take that responsibility really seriously. And I think in relation to, how we move from here, I mean, clearly we have to get the economy back up and running again. This is not an economy that can sustain prolonged lockdown. I think that's just clear to everybody, but we have to try to manage infection, contain infection outbreaks as much as we can. We have to put all of these methods in place. I mean, I don't think we want to get into a position of just completely unconstrained, runaway infection rates. And so I think that's really the kind of, as I was saying earlier, the sort of big, responsibility and challenge for all of us now.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you very much for having us on the webinar. We really appreciate the opportunity.
No, it's a pleasure, and I will invite you again, because I think it's so much more questions that we have to answer. It'd be good to kind of report back on progress. So thank you so much. Yeah. Paul.
So certainly from my perspective, I think that we've seen the incredible call of action and donors from across the board have contributed immensely. I think our challenges, as I said, and as discussed, are big, because there's a huge need for the fund to continue. So we're hoping that we're going to see a further surge of donations, because that's really the area I'm focused on at the moment. Because we are hoping that we've actually demonstrated as a fund that we've got the wherewithal to be able to deliver in short order in a very responsible way. And that, therefore, we've got a track record. and we think this will be months in the making. So we need to be able to continue and sustain ourselves. To your last point, which I think is a very, very important point, is what is the silver lining? I actually think that it's demonstrated that in extreme circumstances, people from different spheres of society come together for the common good of trying to help society. And I think that's really what the fund's been able to do, unshackled by past or indeed governance or government sort of red tape or anything like that. I think it's been incredible. It really has been an incredible journey, and I think it's created a new way of problem solving. And I think that's something we should take forward. And to echo Eddie's thanks. It really is. It's very much appreciated to get on these webinars with so many people to be able to tell our story, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you to the Chamber.
Thank you, Paul, and obviously thank you for being such a supportive board member for the Chamber as well. It's been great working on you bringing this together, and we'll no doubt do more. Cecilia.
I think if I have to look at silver linings, I actually think there are many. I think it's been really great to see that the response from South Africa government, as well as things like the Solidarity Fund, has been fantastic. So I think in terms of what we've done as a business community and as government to try and prepare ourselves as best as possible for something that is so unpredictable, and as Adrian also said, no one is an expert here. I think we've done really well as a country. And I think it is at this stage, it is a wait and see game, and things might not get as bad as some of the projections are trying to prepare us for. They might well get as bad, but at least I think in terms of how prepared we can be, it's been an amazing effort. I also then just want to say to everyone, if we've not gotten to your questions live, we will get in touch with you personally via email after this. And on top of the response from government and solidarity funds on silver linings and support, I think we've also seen how chambers coming together with government and the Solidarity Fund can really play a big part. I've seen members exchanging email addresses to help people get in touch and answer some of the questions they've got. And this is exactly what we want to do as a chamber as well. So these forums help. And as Paul also said, it is about business, chamber networks, government, everyone pulling together and trying our best during this time.
No, thank you, Cecilia. Thank you for coordinating the questions and feeding into the panel today. Always thank you, Ema in Mission Control, running our polls, and Leslie and Venice for being the operational backbone, making sure we're all in the right place at the right time. Just a few comments. I know Rene from Relocation Africa is online, and when I think about silver linings, I think about how we have to adapt and be agile to this new world of COVID. And for me, I'm energized looking at how we can actually take some of these learnings, that we can work from home, we can have a distributed workforce, we can embrace technology, and that's going to bring new opportunities. So I think really the way business can come together and just not sit back waiting for government handouts, which some of our European counterparts could be guilty of doing, has been quite motivational. And for me, it's really given me and my colleagues at the Chamber a sense of purpose to really mobilize this voice of business. So, the theme is fighting back. We are not sitting down waiting to be told when we can start working again. We're going to be influencing government, influencing policy, and supporting you, our members and businesses, to ensure that we not only survive this, but we thrive through the other side of it. So please stay engaged. Thank you to all the other members and other chambers for coming to join us. So let's stay in touch. The more we have a collective voice, the more powerful that will be. We do have some more upcoming webinars, and specifically relating to the world opening up for flights on the 4th of June with Expound Web. So thank you for that. But we will keep communicating with you. I will keep broadcasting. And again, let's just not sit back and just wait for this to happen to us. Let's get on the front foot. Let's come forward with solutions like Terence has suggested. Let's share them. Let's work together. And let's come out and beat COVID and have a stronger economy the other side of this. Adi, Paul, brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work you've done. And to my team, thank you as ever for always going the extra mile and the extra hours throughout this time. I look forward to seeing you in the office next week. We will be socially distanced, but we'll be together. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you for
everyone.
listening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.